Have you ever wondered what actually separates high achievers from the rest of us? Well, welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dive deep into the fascinating mechanics behind the psychology of high performance. Today, we are combining two distinct but deeply connected worlds, the neurology of self-control and the sports psychology of coaching. Whether you're trying to crush a fitness goal, lead a team at work, or honestly just build better daily habits, the science we're about to unpack is going to completely change how you view success.
It's a totally universal problem, right? We all face it. We set a goal, we feel super motivated, and yet, somewhere along the line we stumble. Why do we grab the junk food when we swore we'd eat a salad? Why do elite athletes suddenly crack under pressure despite having rigorous coaching? The answer actually lies in understanding the really complex inner and outer games we play. You see, it's not just about wanting it enough. It's about how we manage our mind's natural instincts and exactly how we respond to the environments and the feedback around us.
So, here's our mental playbook for today. We're going to cover 1. The anatomy of achievement, 2. The willpower muscle, 3. Traps, triggers, and temptations, 4. The coaching feedback matrix, and finally, 5. Fueling intrinsic motivation.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, the anatomy of achievement and how to harness your inner game.
Most of us tend to think of willpower strictly as the ability to say no to a temptation, skipping dessert or turning down a cigarette. But the science shows it is actually way more dynamic than that. It isn't just one single thing. It really requires 3 separate powers all working together. Yes, there's I won't power, resisting the bad stuff, but there's also I will power, the ability to say yes to the hard work, like actually getting on the treadmill. And perhaps most importantly, there's I want power. That's the ability to remember your deeper, long-term motivation when the immediate craving hits. The real key to balancing all 3 of these powers? Cultivating a really high level of self-awareness.
And the cool part is, you can actually train that self-awareness. You don't need to go off to a mountain retreat to do it either. Just 5 minutes of this daily meditation practice is an absolute game changer. By simply sitting still, focusing on your breath, and, this is the crucial part, noticing when your mind wanders, you are literally changing your brain. Researchers have found that this simple habit actually increases blood flow to the self-control centers of your brain. Even if you think you're terrible at meditating because you constantly get distracted, the very act of catching yourself wandering and then refocusing, well, that's exactly the workout your self-awareness needs.
Okay, moving right along to section 2, the willpower muscle, draining and training your self-control.
A really helpful way to think about self-control is that willpower is kind of like a muscle. Just like your biceps get super tired after lifting weights, your willpower gets fatigued after making decisions and resisting urges all day long. But here is where it gets fascinating. There's this great insight from Dr. Timothy Noakes, who studied extreme marathon runners. He found that when endurance athletes feel completely physically exhausted, their muscles aren't actually failing. Instead, their brain is just sensing a drop in energy and generating a feeling of fatigue to pump the brakes and conserve resources. And the exact same mechanism applies to our willpower. When you feel mentally completely depleted at the end of a long day, it's often just your brain pumping the brakes. It's not a sign that your self-control tank is actually at zero.
So the crucial point here is that mental fatigue is highly emotional. Willpower limits are very often just illusions crafted by our own brains to keep us nice and comfortable. But here is the ultimate mental hack. By understanding that this fatigue is just a sensation, you can push past that initial resistance. Much like an athlete trains to ignore that first wave of physical tiredness, you can train your willpower muscle to grow stronger simply by recognizing that, hey, you have more gas in the tank than you think.
That brings us to section 3, traps, triggers, and temptations, or how the mind sabotages us.
Now, even with a strong, well-trained willpower muscle, our brains lay some pretty clever traps for us. One of the absolute biggest is how we view time. We constantly fall into what psychologists call delayed discounting. Think about the contrast here. We look at our present self and we totally surrender to instant gratification because, hey, the donut is right in front of us. But we look at our future self like there's some kind of superhero. We incorrectly assume that tomorrow's version of us will magically have perfect discipline, limitless energy, and absolutely zero stress. Because we disconnect so much from our future selves, we sacrifice our long-term goals and just push all the hard work to tomorrow.
And what happens when we inevitably slip up? We hit what researchers literally call the what the hell effect. We tend to think that beating ourselves up over a mistake, like eating one piece of cake when we're on a diet, will somehow keep us disciplined. But counterintuitively, shame and guilt actually trigger the brain's stress response. And what does the brain crave when it's stressed? Dopamine, instant relief.
So feeling guilty directly leads to greater indulgence. You just say what the hell and eat the whole cake. The science clearly shows that self-compassion and self-forgiveness are the true remedies that stop this downward spiral in its tracks.
But our inner game is also incredibly vulnerable to our outer world. Willpower is astonishingly contagious. Get this. If a close friend becomes obese, your own risk of obesity spikes by a staggering 171%. No way, right? But we are highly social creatures who subconsciously mimic the behaviors, the goals, and even the self-indulgences of the people around us. Our social environment can completely hijack our deepest intentions without us even realizing it's happening.
Which perfectly bridges us to Section 4, the coaching feedback matrix, and the outer game of success.
If the people around us can drain our willpower, well, external guidance, specifically from mentors and coaches, can also absolutely elevate it. To really understand effective coaching, we have to look at self-determination theory. For any kind of feedback to actually improve performance, it has to satisfy three basic psychological needs. First is competence, that feeling that we're improving and actually effective. Second is autonomy, the perception that we have a choice and aren't just being rigidly controlled. And third, relatedness, the feeling of being connected and valued. If feedback violates these needs, especially autonomy, the athlete or individual is simply going to reject the guidance.
Think about how coaches typically interact with their players. It usually falls onto a sort of grid. On one side, we have supportive feedback, which confirms good actions, versus corrective feedback, which is aimed at fixing bad ones. On the other side, we have what the feedback actually targets. Is it behavior-based, focusing on the mechanics of the action itself, or is it person-based, focusing on the athlete's internal traits? The real secret to unlocking performance lies exactly in where a coach's feedback lands on this grid.
When you compare the two, giving behavior-based feedback is infinitely better. Think about it. When a coach says, "Make sure to keep your shoulders level next time," they're targeting a very specific action. It gives clear direction, and it completely protects the individual's ego. But when a coach uses person-based feedback, saying something like, "You're just not focused today," they are targeting the individual's disposition. This risks harming the athlete's self-esteem and triggers that defensive, ego-driven stress response we talked about earlier. And that absolutely tanks motivation.
And the data backs this up perfectly. A study looking at 169 elite NCAA athletes found that the path to peak performance is highly specific. When coaches rely on autonomy-supportive, behavior-based feedback, they directly amplify an athlete's motivation. Person-based corrective feedback, on the other hand, actively damages intrinsic motivation. So by targeting specific physical behaviors rather than attacking a person's character, a coach creates the ideal psychological environment that reliably predicts peak performance.
Let's bring it all together in Section 5, Fueling Intrinsic Motivation, synthesizing the inner and outer games.
The central takeaway here is that both willpower training, so managing your own mind, and effective behavior-based coaching share the exact same ultimate goal. And that goal is building intrinsic motivation. Whether you are internally mastering your own dopamine triggers and forgiving yourself for mistakes, or you're on the receiving end of constructive, targeted advice from a mentor, doing the work for the pure joy and internal satisfaction of the task is the ultimate performance enhancer. And the data confirms this universally. Whether you're in an academic classroom, a corporate office, or out on the athletic field, intrinsic motivation consistently outperforms external rewards like money or trophies. And it wildly outperforms fear-based stress when it comes to delivering sustainable, high-quality results. When you actually enjoy the process for its own sake, you don't have to white-knuckle your way through willpower depletion. And honestly, what a relief, right?
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to challenge you to look at your own playbook. Whether you're coaching a team right now or just coaching yourself, are you relying on guilt, harsh rules, and person-based criticism to fuel your current goals? Or are you treating yourself and others with a targeted, behavior-based, compassionate feedback that's required to build a true instinct for success? The science is clear. The path to high performance isn't about being harder on yourself, it's about being smarter with your mind.